Thanksgiving is a time of warmth, family gatherings, and gratitude of it sometimes. Beneath the comfortable veneer, darkness lurks. Tonight, we delve into 3 very scary true Thanksgiving horror storystles, soaked in the chill of dread and real enough to haunt your next holiday. As you listen, imagine the smells of roasted turkey and autumn leaves, and the sinister whispers caught in the crackling fire's glow. Prepare yourself for creeping fear, because these stories prove that some Thanksgivings are never truly safe. The long winding driveway sank deeper into the thick woods, flanked by towering oaks brushing their skeletal branches against the indigo sky. Emma's car groaned past dead leaves and gravel, her breath fogging in the chill of early November. The air smelled of damp earth and wood smoke curling faintly in the distance, teasing the promise of warmth. Tonight was Thanksgiving Eve, and Emma had reluctantly agreed to visit her estranged father's old cabin for the first time in years. She gripped the steering wheel tighter as the low hum of her headlights barely pierced the growing darkness. Her father, Harold, hadn't spoken to her much since her parents' divorce 3 years earlier. The invitation, a terse note left on her doorstep, simply said, "Come for dinner. One last time." The cabin came into view, nestled in a small clearing, its windows dim but welcoming, shadows dancing behind the curtains. Emma parked and felt the crunch of brittle leaves under her boots as she approached the heavy wooden door, noticing the faint scent of pine and a hint of something else musty and old, like forgotten memories. Her fingers trembled as she lifted the cold brass knob and stepped inside. The room was narrow and smelled of soot and aged wood. Flickering candlelight from a wrought iron candelabrum cast long shadows on the walls. A fire crackled in the stone fireplace, its warmth enveloping her and melting some of her apprehension. Harold sat hunched in a battered armchair, his grizzled face pale and weary, his eyes flicked up, unreadable. "Emma," he rasped, the sound dry like autumn leaves crumbling. "You came," she nodded, forcing a smile. "I tried to call, but ... Phone's dead," he interrupted. Old lines. She followed the scent wafting through the room, roast turkey, rosemary, and something smoky and metallic, like burnt iron. The dining table was set simply. Wooden plates, tarnished silverware, a centerpiece of withered chrysanthemums. Harold poured 2 glasses of dark red wine, their clinking delicate against the cabin's creaks and the distant call of a lone owl. They ate quietly at first, the night pressing in. Emma watched as her father's pale hands trembled slightly when he reached for the salt shaker. The rhythmic tapping of rain began outside, soft but steady, beating down on the roof like a warning. Suddenly, a cold draft swept through the room, snuffing out the candles. The darkness closed in, suffocating and thick. Emma's breath hitched. Harold paused mid-bite, eyes darting toward the doorway as if sensing something. "Did you hear that?" he murmured. The air shifted again, carrying a faint but unmistakable coppery scent blood. Emma stood, heart pounding a frantic rhythm. The cabin felt alive, its walls whispering secrets in the shadows. She reached for the fireplace poker just as the door creaked open slowly, revealing a silhouette against the storm. A figure stepped inside, face obscured by the dim light, and the air turned icy. Harold's eyes hardened. "You shouldn't have come," he said. "Not tonight." Emma's hand tightened around the poker, the weight grounding her in the surreal moment. The stranger's footsteps tapped relentless against the wooden floor, echoing like a death knell. Outside, the rain intensified, hammering the roof, drowning their muffled voices. The cabin's comforting smells twisted roast turkey scented, now more like burnt flesh. Something unseen shifted just beyond her sightline, brushing against the room's edge in a whisper of movement. Emma's skin prickled, senses sharpening as the oppressive night threatened to swallow them whole. The figure moved deeper into the room, its presence filling the cold spaces between the wooden beams. Emma's heartbeat thrummed loudly in her ears, the taste of fear bitter on her tongue. She glanced at Harold, whose jaw was clenched tight, face drawn with exhaustion and something darker resignation. "It's here because of us," Harold breathed, voice barely audible over the roaring fire. "Because of what we unleashed last Thanksgiving." Emma's mind reeled. What do you mean?" Before her father could respond, the room plunged into darkness again as the lights flickered and died. The storm raged outside with ferocity now. Thunder growled low, shaking the cabin's timbers. Rain slid down the windows in streaks like fingers scraping glass. The metallic scent grew stronger, now mixed with something acrid and raw. The stranger's shadow loomed larger, reaching toward them like a living nightmare. Emma's grip on the poker slipped as cold sweat dripped down her back. She fumbled for her phone to use its flashlight, but the screen stayed black dead battery or no signal. She couldn't tell. A low guttural sound rumbled from the doorway. The stranger's outline wavered, as if caught between this world and the next. Harold stood suddenly, old bones creaking, and plunged a knife into the nearest wall with a deafening thud. "You can't stop it," he growled. "You can only delay it." The fire sputtered, and the temperature plunged abruptly. Emma's breath emerged in sharp white puffs. The air smelled of cold iron and something putridique. From the shadows, eerie whispers curled, words indecipherable but thick with menace. She backed away slowly, the rough wooden floor biting at her shoes. Her eyes locked on a small wooden box on the mantelpiece, carved with strange symbols almost pulsing faintly in the dark. Instinct screamed for her to open it. Reaching out trembling fingers, the box felt unnervingly warm, as if alive. Harold's voice cracked the silence. "Open it. The curse binds us." With a sharp snap, the box lid fell open. Inside lay a faded photograph family, smiling, but their eyes scratched out with crude black lines. Beneath it, a thin shard of rusted metal gleamed unsettlingly. Emma's skin crawled as she recognized the object, a piece of the old turkey carving knife, the one missing since last year's feast. From the corners of the room, shadows thickened, slithering along the walls as if reaching for her. A guttural wailing filled the cabina chorus of lost souls, trapped between worlds, their sorrow twisted into rage. Suddenly, the stranger reached forward with a hand blurred at the edges, a sickly yellow glow emanating from its palm. "You summoned us," it hissed. "Now we feast." Emma stumbled, the air thickening into a choking fog. Her ears rang as the room spun, time unraveling like frayed rope. She felt icy fingers brush her skin, whispering forgotten names in a tongue not meant for human ears. Harold fell to his knees, clutching a talisman hidden beneath his shirt. He muttered frantic prayers, words old as the forest around them. The stranger recoiled, shrieking, shadows exploding outward like shattered glass. Light fractured through the cabin's gloom as dawn's first pale fingers pushed aside night's grasp. A figure vanished, leaving only silence and a cold that seeped into the bones. Emma collapsed, chest heaving, as the sun climbed higher, flooding the cabin with a fragile warmth. But the smell lingered metallic and sour, a reminder that some feasts never truly end. Her father whispered hoarsely, "Every Thanksgiving it comes. We burn the past to hold it at bay. But next year might be different." Emma's eyes stayed fixed on the broken photograph, the blackened eyes staring back, promising that darkness would return again with the coming cold. Thanksgiving morning was too bright and still to feel normal. Mark found himself standing outside the old farmhouse, its white paint chipped and peeling under the brittle autumn sun. The dry scent of fallen leaves mingled with the faint, sour tang of something long forgotten. He reached the rusted mailbox, finger tracing the faded address's grandmother's home. She had passed away just weeks earlier, and today he was supposed to sort through her things, Inside, the air was thick with dust and something heavyweighty nostalgia, mixed with a faint mustiness like damp clothes left too long in an attic. Ghostly shafts of light filtered through tattered curtains, dust motes dancing in the still air like tiny specters. Raymond, Mark's uncle, was already there, shuffling through piles of yellowed newspapers and broken pottery, mumbling about odds and ends. "You sure you want to do this today?" Raymond asked, voice low, eyes cast downward. "Yeah," Mark replied, swallowing a sudden lump. It was her wish. They moved carefully through the cramped rooms, the silent house creaking and settling, as if reluctant to reveal its secrets. The kitchen was cold, its windows frosted with grime. The old oven sat silent, the faint smell of burnt cinnamon lingering like a faint echo of past Thanksgivings. Mark opened a drawer and found a small leather-bound book, pages yellowed but neat. A diary. He flipped through entries spanning years, each dated beneath the looping handwriting of his grandmother, Eleanor. The last few entries stopped abruptly with jagged scribbles and indecipherable words. As he read aloud a particularly chilling note about voices in the cellar, the house's atmosphere shifted. A sudden draft swirled around them, carrying the faintest whiff of rot and dying leaves. The floorboards creaked ominously behind Mark's back. The cellar door stood ajar, a darkness yawning below the cracked wooden steps. Mark hesitated, but then flicked on his flashlight, the narrow beam cutting through the blackness. The air was thick and foul, smelling of stale earth, and something fouled like something dead decaying beneath the floor. As he descended, the ragged breathing of the wind outside faded, replaced by an oppressive silence that pressed against his eardrums. Near the bottom steps, something sharp and cold grazed his ankle. He jerked his foot back and caught sight of muddy footprints leading into the shadows. "Uncle, come down here," Mark called, voice barely more than a whisper. Raymond joined, the two moving deeper into the cellar. Shelves sagged under the weight of ancient jars and spider-webbed bottles. The flashlight beam caught a strange symbol scrawled on the far wall a circle, with jagged lines intersecting it like broken stars. Underneath, letters scratched in trembling hands spelled, "Do not welcome." A low hum filled the space, suddenly a vibration in the air, like distant chanting or whispering voices. Mark's skin prickled as the beam flitted toward a small rotted door set into the far corner wall. It was nailed shut, but splinters suggested it had been forced open recently. Without thinking, Mark reached down for an old crowbar resting beside a broken crate and pried the door open. A putrid gust escaped, carrying the unmistakable stench of decay and old blood. The flashlight beam revealed a small cavernous space, walls stained with dark streaks. At the center lay a crude altar of twisted twigs, old bones, and faded photos, layered beneath a thick coating of dust. On top, a dried turkey leg sat as a grotesque offering, its leathery skin cracked and curling. Suddenly, the room chilled like the breath of something dead. Whispered voices rose from the depths of the alleying shadows, begging, pleading, angry. Mark stepped back, the hairs on his neck standing stiff. The door slammed shut behind them with such force it shook the cellar. They were plunged into total darkness, the flashlight flickering out. The whispering turned to shrieks that sliced through the silence. Around them, the air pulsed with a terrible presence, hungry and unyielding. Mark's breath came hard and fast. His hands fumbled for the door latch. The nails that had held the door were broken, but they still jammed tight. His uncle shouted for help, pounding on the wooden walls, but their voices dissolved into the night outside. The cellar seemed alive with walls throbbing, a sickly sweet stench pressing in. Mark could feel damp fingers grazing his skin, pulling, grasping. Somewhere far off, the sound of a bird call twisted into a sinister cackle. Minutes or maybe hours passed in that choking darkness. Then, as suddenly as it began, silence fell. The door creaked open slowly. They scrambled out, gasping for air, the cold November breeze biting through their sweat-soaked clothes. Eleanor's diary slipped from Mark's hands, pages fluttering open to an entry that chilled him to the bone. The feast is never finished. The voices call for more. The cellar must be locked, the offering kept fresh. For if we forget, the shadows grow hungry. Mark and Raymond glanced at each other, knowing this Thanksgiving was just the first bite of something far worse. In the days that followed, Mark couldn't shake the cellar's oppressive presence. At night, strange noises echoed through the farmhouse of scraping, muffled thuds, and that eerie whispering just beyond comprehension. The stale scent of rot trailed him like a shadow. Determined to rid the house of whatever lingered, Mark returned with his cousin Lisa on Thanksgiving evening. The air was crisp, tinged with wood smoke, and the faint nutty aroma of roasting nuts from a neighbor's chimney. Inside, the house was dark, save for the hearth's dying embers casting flickering orange patterns. They ascended to the cellar, armed with candles, salt, and a heavy-worn Bible Eleanor had kept. Mark's hands trembled as he carefully opened the rotten door again, dreading what they might find. This time, the altar had changed. The dried turkey leg lay atop it, now blackened, crusted with dried blood that glistened unnaturally. Scrawled around it, twisted symbols erased and rewritten in haste. The whispering voices lifted, unmistakably angry, dripping with a hunger that set Lisa's teeth on edge. Mark sprinkled salt in a wide circle, the crystals tinkling loudly in the hush. Lisa held the Bible high, reading aloud verses with shaking voice. The oppressive weight in the room seemed to press in harder, chilling them to the bone. Suddenly, a shadow burst from the corner, swirling and taking shape vague, monstrous, but dripping with rage. It lunged forward, and Mark barely shoved Lisa aside, the dark form passing through them as an icy gale tore through the cellar. They scrambled out, slamming the door behind them. Outside, the wind howled, leaves swirling in twisted little tornadoes around their feet. The moon was obscured by swirling clouds, the darkness eager to reclaim the space. But Mark knew the truthsome things didn't die, no matter how many prayers were uttered or offerings burned. The feast beneath the house was never ending, a curse passed down through centuries of silence and fear. That night, as the family gathered in the living room, the smell of turkey roasting lingered, mingled with the faint, sickly scent of decay. In the background, faint whispering seemed to carry on the wind, promising that this Thanksgiving was only the beginning of the horrors yet to come. Thanksgiving was always a bustling celebration for the Turner family, full of laughter, clinking glasses, and the comforting smell of cinnamon, cloves, and roasting turkey. That year, the ritual was no different. The house smelled faintly of burnt sage, indicating grandmother had done her protective rounds that morning. Lena had arrived early to help with preparations, the kitchen alive with the rhythmic chopping of vegetables and the sizzle of butter melting in cast-iron pans. Inside, the heavy oak table gleamed, set perfectly with her grandmother's antique plates and crystal wine glasses catching the soft glow of the afternoon sun. Despite the warmth, there was an undercurrent Lena couldn't quite explain, a prickling sensation at the base of her neck, as if invisible eyes watched her every move. Outside, the wind was unusually sharp, whipping dried leaves against the window panes in ragged gusts. The family gathered, old stories filling the rooms as plates piled high with mashed potatoes, green beans, stuffing, and golden turkey. The clatter of silverware and murmured blessings blended with the pop and snap of logs in the hearth. Lena smiled, but her eyes often flicked toward the hallway where shadows pooled deeper than the light should allow. After the meal, the group moved to the living room, where an antique grandfather clock ticked methodically, its pendulum swinging with a hypnotic certainty. Lena excused herself, craving a breath of fresh air. She stepped onto the porch, the night air crisp and filled with the bittersweet aroma of dying leaves and distant wood smoke. As she gazed into the dark woods edging the property, a sudden chill wrapped around her, colder than the autumn night should be. The wind whispered, carrying voice low, urgent, threading through the rustling branches. A shadow slipped from between two trees, or perhaps just a trick of the moonlight. Lena's breath misted before her as she stepped down from the porch, heart thundering. The figure, indistinct against the dark, seemed too tall, too thin, its movements jerky and unnatural. She swallowed hard and took a cautious step back. The figure advanced, and the scent of decay crept over her like rotting fruit mixed with burnt candles. The wind died suddenly. Silence pressed down with suffocating weight. Lena fumbled for her phone, but it flickered and died. The only sound was the distant hoot of an owl, warped into a low, mournful scream. Behind her, the porch light winked out. She turned to run, but the ground beneath her seemed to shift, roots tangling around her ankles. The darkness thickened, the shadows' whispers swelling into desperate, wavering cries. Lena's heartbeat nearly stopped. The chill burrowed deep. Suddenly, a hand gripped her arm with surprising strength, pulling her back toward the house. It was her grandfather, eyes wide with fear and urgency. "Don't go out there, Lena," he urged, his breath ragged. "It's hunger that comes every year. If it reaches inside, it takes more than your fear." They stumbled inside, doors slamming behind them. A fireplace suddenly roared back to life, warm and fierce, banishing the shadows from the room. Yet Lena couldn't shake the feeling that whatever was outside was waiting, patient and hungry, eager for the next feast. As the family tried to regain composure, the heavy wooden walls seemed to close in. The comforting crackle of the fire did little to ease the unease, creeping like cold fingers along the spine. Lena's grandfather sat heavily in his chair, gripping an old, faded Nifia relic rumored to protect the familia talisman against the ancient dread tied to their lineage. "Every year," he explained, voice low and trembling, "something comes to the feast. Its hunger a spirit, born from greed and neglect. It feeds on family, on memories, on the very voices that gather here tonight." Lena took deep breaths, feeling the weight of his words settling in the air. Outside, the wind howled anew, rattling the windows and causing the curtains to flutter like ghostly lungs. The scent of burnt sage mixed curiously with the faint metallic tinge of blood. From the hallway came a soft thudding, repetitive like footsteps dragging just beyond vision. The family fell silent, each breath catching the sense of an unseen presence, growing like a shadow, stretching to smother the light. Suddenly, the grandfather clock's pendulum stopped mid-swing. The room chilled to bone-deep cold. The fire flickered as if gasping for life, sending long, quivering shadows that clutched at the walls. Lena's pulse accelerated, prickling with a cold sweat that ran icy down her back. A whisper spilled from the dark corners, fragmented, pleading. "Feast, feast, double quotes it repeated, folding into itself. The smell of decay grew overpowering. Lena's eyes adjusted to the gloom, and she thought she saw shapes twisting in the firelight faces, contorted in silent screams. The front door creaked, slowly inching open with a screech. A foul wind spilled inside, snuffing out candles and howling through the house like a banshee. Lena felt a cold hand brush her cheek, a touch so fleeting and yet suffocating. The shadows around the room coalesced, urging, calling. Her grandfather rose, the knife gleaming faintly, and began circling, cutting the air in slow patterns of protection. The family joined hands, their whispered prayers weaving a fragile barrier. Outside, the restless hunger scratched at the walls, a scratching like claws on wood. The smell of burnt flesh mingled with rotting fruit and stale wine. The clock chimed midnight, the deep toll echoing through the house like a grim warning. Then, with a force shuddering the floorboards, the front door slammed shut. The house seemed to exhale, the suffocating pressure lifting. Lena's grandfather sank back into his chair, exhausted but solemn. "It waits," he said, "always hungry. But the feast has been protected tonight." The family held their silent vigil as the warmth slowly returned, the fire crackling stronger, scents of cinnamon and roasting turkey finally reclaiming the air. Yet Lena knew in her bones, some hungers are eternal, and some thanksgivings bear a darkness that can never be fully banished. The night stretched on, the house settling once more into uneasy calm, somewhere beyond the trees. Eyes watched and waited for the next feast to begin. Thank you for listening to these true Thanksgiving horror stories. May your holiday tables be warm, your family close, and the shadows kept well at bay. Until next time, stay safe and keep your lights burning bright.